Welcome to the Jackson Rudolph podcast. I am your host, Jackson Rudolph, and this is episode 8, the Notorious, aka Warrior Cup. And that is because we have two different topics today, not one, but we have two discussion topics today. We are talking about Conor McGregor and his recent UFC win over Donald Cowboy Cerrone, and we are going to be talking about the aka Warrior Cup going down this upcoming weekend. Now, since Warrior Cup is one of the main discussion topics, there will not be a tournament talk this week, but we are going to be discussing at the end of this episode, we're going to discuss some potential news segments that may be coming to the Jackson Rudolph podcast. But before we get into discussion, first and foremost, happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day, or should I say Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. You know, I always like to reflect a little bit on Martin Luther King Day because I feel like so many people forget the significance and the bravery of what Martin Luther King did. Let me rephrase that. People don't forget the significance. Everybody knows how important Martin Luther King was, but people forget the level of bravery that it took. Like, he was standing up to oppression in a time that in the United States of America, you know, we were still hosing down people of color with fire hoses and attacking them with dogs and everything else. And it was just a horrible, not to mention all of like the segregation laws and the fact that, you know, the separate but not so equal policies, just the atrocities of that time. And people also forget that was only, you know, that was the 60s. So you think 40 years, this is 2020, that's 60 years ago. Like 60 years ago, that is within people's lifetime that we were living in that version of America. So the bravery that Martin Luther King showed in standing up to that oppression is something that is truly admirable and should never be forgotten. In other news, before we get into discussion, the Jackson Rudolph podcast also received a nomination in the sportmartialarts.com Viewer Choice Awards as one of the top 4 finalists for the Best Martial Arts Show. So we beat out some other awesome shows to get the nomination, which I'm very thankful and blessed for. And we're up against some really good shows. I don't think that there's any more voting that goes into it. I believe that it's already set. They just announced the 4 finalists, and then they announce who actually wins at the Saturday Night Finals of the Warrior Cup. But thank you all so much already for showing your support and going out there and voting just to get the nomination with some of the other awesome shows, the Sport Martial Arts Minute, as well as Sport Martial Arts Live. I mean, their Sport Martial Arts Awards. Sport Martial Arts has been around forever, and the fact that they have shows right now I believe both of them are Facebook based. I know the Sport Martial Arts Minute also gets uploaded to Instagram, but the Sport Martial Arts team's been doing a great job with those. And then I believe the other nomination was Alex Reyes with Point Fighter Live, who Alex Reyes is always doing great things for the sport karate community. So at this point, I don't really care who wins. I'm just proud that the Jackson Rudolph podcast, in its infancy of this show, we are only on week 8 of the Jackson Rudolph podcast. We were able to secure the nomination, and thank all of my listeners very, very much for that. And so now we're going to get on into the discussion. And because this is a sport karate-based show, there will be times after big UFC fights that I talk about the UFC. Because I think that there's a direct relationship to sport karate. Point fighters have been proven to be successful in mixed martial arts multiple times. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson was originally a point karate fighter. Obviously, Raymond Daniels a few months ago had that spectacular knockout where he almost like cheated the 720 kick and then came through with a knockout punch. Ross Levine, a legendary point fighter, is now he's not doing MMA, but I know he's doing full contact with the kickboxing for glory. I don't know if he has plans to move on to MMA later or what, but either way, full contact fighting. So a lot of parallels between the UFC and point fighting. And so with the fight that just happened, I want to start by giving a little bit of perspective because I think that it may surprise people that know me that I'm a Conor McGregor fan, and I've been a Conor McGregor fan for a long time. But let me explain a little bit here. So I've been a fan since the Chad Mendes fight. When Conor McGregor fought Chad Mendes, he was going for the interim featherweight title in the UFC, and he was going to, if he won that fight, it was presumed that he would go on to try to unify the belt and lose the interim title and gain the actual title by fighting the undefeated for a decade champion, Jose Aldo. And in that Mendes fight, there were 2 things that made me fall in love with Conor McGregor. And this is without any of the pre-fight shenanigans, any of that. There were 2 things within the fight that made me fall in love with Conor McGregor. Number 1 was where we were. So I remember I watched that fight at I believe it was a UFC / Century type event in Las Vegas. It wasn't the Super Show, but I think Century was involved. There was an ISKA tournament going on that we competed in, which is actually going to be what Storytime is about today. Team Paul Mitchell competed in that tournament. I believe that was in 2015. And there was a special watch party for the Conor McGregor fight because of his pre-fight antics, which I did not appreciate. Conor had already risen to stardom before he ever even got this interim belt. But I remember sitting in that crowd, and we were in a room full watching this giant screen of this fight, a room full of Americans in Las Vegas, and Chad Mendes being an American. But over the course of that fight, the entire crowd was moved to be rooting for Conor McGregor. Like, we were a crowd full of Americans, and in the middle of the fight, we were all going, ole, 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 which is like one of like the identifiable Conor McGregor cheers. You know what I mean? So the fact that he was able to turn an entire crowd, I mean, there was probably 1,500 of us in that room watching that fight. 1,500 Americans turned them into Conor McGregor fans over the course of this fight. And then the second thing that made me fall in love with Conor McGregor about that fight was the way that he won that fight. Chad Mendes was on top of Conor, bashing him in the head over and over again with these brutal elbow strikes. And Conor found a way, Conor's not known as a great grappler, found a way off the ground, defended himself, took the elbows, got up, and then delivered that infamous left hand to knock out Chad Mendes with only like 10 seconds left in the round. So it was clutch, it was a comeback victory, and just the way and the resiliency that he showed in that fight was something that made me fall in love with Conor McGregor. So initially, I was a fan in spite of his attitude. But part of what made, and if you guys don't know what I'm talking about by the attitude, Conor McGregor previously has been known for being, using lots of cursing, often very personal insults towards his opponents, even insulting them in their native tongues, things that are just very, very disrespectful. But if you listen to any interview with Conor, he always says that he does this out of the fight buildup. In my opinion, it doesn't matter. You should never disrespect somebody, even if you're trying to build up a fight, no matter what the case is, right? But part of what made me a fan, in spite of his attitude, was the character that he showed after a fight was over. Like, win or lose, even when he was selling his fights this way, at the end of the fight, he bowed to his opponent. He showed his opponent respect. He was humble in defeat. He was gracious in victory. So after fights, historically, Conor did a very good job of being a respectful competitor, even though he had not done so before the fight. As he says, it's all business in an attempt to try to build up the fight. And so one of the things that impressed me most, going ahead and moving on from why I'm a fan of Conor McGregor and moving into the fight against Donald Cowboy Cerrone, is he has completely changed. He got into a lot of legal trouble over the past year since he lost to Khabib, which, if you guys don't know, one of the biggest fights over the past couple of years was his lightweight fight against Khabib Nurmagomedov, in which Conor was beaten pretty badly in that fight. Khabib basically won the striking game, got Conor on the ground, stayed on top of Conor for a while, and then wound up defeating him with a neck crank, which is not a choke, but it's a position where Khabib was basically kind of twisting Conor's head off his body and forced Conor to tap. And so anyway, he got into a lot of legal trouble, and seemed like Conor McGregor was falling apart. It seemed like Conor McGregor was going to be done. After all the things that were going on and everything that was coming out in the news. But before this fight against Donald Cerrone, Conor seems to have completely turned all of that around. He seems relaxed. He seems humble. He's not getting into the trouble that you used to hear about him getting into. And if you listen to any of the pre-fight interviews, the press conferences, he showed the utmost respect for Donald Cerrone throughout all of the build-up to this fight, something that he had never done before. Like with every other fighter, he insulted them egregiously before the fights, but he showed a tremendous deal of respect and grace at every stage of the build-up to this fight, and I respect Conor a great deal for that. And now we get to the actual fight, and this is where we get to talk about the actual karate stuff. So Conor McGregor defeated Donald Cowboy Cerrone in 40 seconds. The most significant strikes that he landed, there were 3 strikes that he landed that were significant. He started the fight with shoulder strikes to Donald Cerrone's face that I'm going to talk about in a second. What dazed Cerrone and essentially got the knockout was a left leg round kick to the head. And then he finished off Cerrone with punches and kind of pummeling him on the ground until I believe the ref was Herb Dean that stopped the fight. So first, let's talk about those shoulders. This is a technique that has been used in the UFC before. I saw a lot of people tweeting about it, like how John Jones had used the technique before, things like that. But it's a technique that I have not personally seen in the UFC in a long time. And basically, you could tell that this was something that McGregor game planned because he came out as he normally does, guns a-blazing, starts the fight by throwing a huge left, which misses. But Conor knew that there was a chance that left would miss because Cerrone's a seasoned fighter. So when he misses the left, he intentionally overshoots the left. He was not going to undershoot that big left hand. He overshoots the left hand so that he is immediately, we're literally 3 or 4 seconds into the fight, and they're already in the clinch. The moment that McGregor gets Donald Cerrone in the clinch, he lowers his left shoulder, and he just unloads his shoulder, his collarbone, into Cowboy's face. And like if you could see after the fight, he landed, I believe it was 4 of these shoulder strikes while in that clinch. And in the process, broke Cerrone's nose, as well as, and by the way, I'm going to use Cerrone and Cowboy interchangeably. Cerrone is Donald's last name, and then Cowboy is the nickname that he uses. Most people know him as Cowboy Cerrone. Anyway, so at the end of the fight, you can tell that Cowboy's nose was broken from these shoulder strikes, and he also had developed a hematoma, or a big buildup of blood, over his left eye from these shoulder strikes. So these shoulder strikes were doing significant damage. This is a shoulder. It's not an elbow. It's not a punch. This is a shoulder being driven into somebody's face. That is extremely creative, despite the fact that other people have done it before. The fact that Conor thought to do that in this fight, in this situation, on a comeback, and to be that creative in that moment is very impressive. And then obviously the skill that it takes to win with a head kick knockout is very impressive. But another thing that's impressive about this fight is who it was that Conor beat. Now, most people would agree that Donald Cerrone is past his prime. However, doesn't matter if you're past your prime if this is the resume that you have. Donald Cowboy Cerrone, the person that Conor McGregor just defeated in less than 40 seconds, which, by the way, is the fastest that Donald Cerrone has ever been knocked out. Cowboy Cerrone leads the UFC all time in wins. He is the winningest fighter in the history of the UFC. He has the most finishes. So that means that he is the combination of knocking people out and making people submit with the fight not going the distance. He has the most finishes in the history of the UFC. He has the most knockdowns. That means that he has made grown men fall on their backs more than anybody in the history of the UFC. He has the most knockouts via kick in the history of the UFC. So he has kicked more people in the head and knocked them unconscious than anybody in the history of the UFC. And he has the most post-fight bonuses. Fight of the night, performance of the night, basically meaning that he put on an excellent show. Now, some of these, granted, were great fights that he may have lost, but he participated in a great fight, which gives even more credibility to the loss. Like, yeah, he lost, but it was a really good fight, good enough to win him a post-fight bonus. So he leads the UFC in history for post-fight bonuses. He is a guaranteed UFC Hall of Famer. That is the guy that Conor McGregor just knocked out in 40 seconds. Let's not remember that in the first installation of Conor McGregor's prime, when he fought Jose Aldo, who Conor knocked out in 13 seconds, had been undefeated for 10 years. He had not lost, it was 18 consecutive fights. He had not lost a fight in 10 years, and Conor knocked him out in 13 seconds. And now it seems as if this fight has brought Conor into what I'm going to call his second prime. He looks healthy again. He looks refocused. He has a new character about him. And he has also now recorded knockouts in 3 different weight classes. He has knocked people out at 170 pounds, at 155 pounds, and the featherweight, which I believe is 145. Yeah, 145, 155, and 170. He's knocked people out at 3 different weights. That's something that nobody else in UFC history has done, and that is very impressive. You might have to fact check me on that. Somebody else might have done it before, but I think Conor's definitely the first person to knock people out in 3 different weight classes, and at one point hold belts in 2 different weight classes, being featherweight and lightweight. And so now the next question becomes, what's next for him? Now, a lot of people are saying that Conor is back. Is Conor the greatest UFC fighter of all time? The answer is no. He's not the greatest UFC fighter of all time. That comes down to guys like George St. Pierre, John Bones Jones. Conor has not elevated himself into the territory of, is he the greatest UFC fighter of all time yet? And certainly not with this one fight against Cerrone. Conor needs to string together several more wins to be anywhere near that conversation. He has to avenge his loss to Khabib, things like that. And a lot of people are saying that, like, oh, Conor would beat Khabib easily. Conor could sweep any division they want to right now. I don't think any of that's true. Conor still has weaknesses. His grappling still isn't at an expert level. Now, granted, he could out-grapple me. I'm not criticizing Conor's grappling, but it's not at the level of a guy like Khabib, obviously. And so Conor still has things to work on in his game. And also, like I said, Cowboy Cerrone's past his prime. So we need to see Conor fight somebody in their prime, which is why I believe the next fight for Conor McGregor should be against Jorge Masvidal. To me, this fight makes the most sense. I think the fight should be most likely at 170. That's what also makes sense. I think that's what Masvidal normally fights at. There's a ton of hype around Jorge Masvidal right now. It would be a super fight. He recently won the BMF belt, which is a belt that the UFC made up for publicity purposes. But nonetheless, he won that belt. So technically, it would be a fight for a belt. I assume that BMF belt would be on the line. I won't talk about what BMF stands for, but your parents can look that up if you're a kid listening. If you're one of the parents, it's there's a bad word in the acronym. But anyway, and then I believe that after the Masvidal matchup, that should probably set him up for a title shot with either Kamaru Usman, who's the current 170 belt holder, or Khabib, who's the current lightweight 155 belt holder. To me, it makes the most sense for him to have a rematch with Khabib. And then if he gets the rematch with Khabib and winds up beating Khabib, at that point, then he is the undisputed lightweight champion. Then he maybe considers fighting Kamaru Usman or whoever is holding the 170 belt, so that then he can try to get the double champ status in a different two weight classes. So originally he was the double champ in featherweight and lightweight, and then in the current era he would be lightweight in the 170 division, which I believe is welterweight. But anyway, so that's what I think should be next for Conor McGregor. I think he should go for Jorge Masvidal next. Try to beat Jorge Masvidal, which would be a huge fight. Tons of publicity, tons of fans on both sides there. The build-up to that fight would be awesome, especially with this new, more humble McGregor. And it would just be a huge fight, and it would set McGregor up, I believe, for a title shot in either weight class that he wanted to get the title shot in. But we'll see what the future holds. We'll see how Conor continues to develop. So that is my 2 cents on the recent UFC happenings. And before we move on to talking about Warrior Cup, we're going to hear an advertisement from Century Signature Weapons. Century Martial Arts Signature Series weapons by world champions and Team Paul Mitchell members, myself, Jackson Rudolph, as well as Mackenzie Emery and Danny Etkin. The Jackson Rudolph bows, the Mackenzie Emery kamas, and the Danny Etkin nunchucks are specifically designed to be made to the same specifications that all of these competitors use in competition. They are the best of the best quality, manufactured by one of the best manufacturers, which is G-Force Weapons. Century Signature Weapons are an awesome product. Head on over to centurymartialarts.com and type in Jackson Rudolph, Mackenzie Emery, or Danny Etkin in the search bar to check out all of the Signature Series products from Century today. And now we're going to go ahead and transition into Warrior Cup talk. And there's 2 main topics that I want to cover for Warrior Cup here. And the first is something about major tournaments that I always hear coaches talking about a lot. And when I say major tournaments, I'm primarily referring to the tournaments that are the biggest deals for Forms competitors, which are Warrior Cup, the US Open, and the Diamond Nationals. For fighters, you can throw in a tournament like the Irish Open, which is a huge deal to win the Irish Open, things like that. So that's what I'm talking about when I say major tournaments. And a lot of coaches tell their students, and I'm referring to coaches of karate schools that have students go to tournaments. I'm referring to coaches that are competitors that coach people privately, amongst coaches of teams, whatever. Many different circles of coaches I've heard this from. And I hear a lot of coaches tell their students about how you should treat a major just like it's any other tournament. Like, you should just go out there, treat it like it's any other form that you would run. Just go out there and treat it like it's a regular tournament. And this is primarily a technique that's used to calm students down, help them with their nerves, stuff like that. But it's a position that's very, very common and very, very popular that I personally happen to disagree with. And I don't vehemently disagree. I don't think that coaches that say this are bad coaches, because it's the majority of coaches that say that you should treat the majors just like any other tournament. But I disagree, and here's why. I believe that you should be abundantly aware of the significance of the moment. So if you are going on stage to compete for a Warrior Cup, you should be fully aware of how important it is so that you can appreciate that. Like the thrill and the excitement of going for something that big, something with that much significance, something with that much history is a feeling that is rare in the human experience. Like not every human gets to go out there and perform in front of people and have a chance to win one of the most coveted awards in a sport. Like that is such a unique emotion, right? Now, I am skipping over a few steps, right? Like most of the time when coaches say to a student, treat the major like any other tournament, they're referring to when they compete in the division. They're not expecting that student necessarily to make it all the way up into a Warrior Cup round. But my belief is that if you are going to make it to a Warrior Cup round or to a US Open final on TV or to a Diamond Ring night show, if in order to make it there, you have to show up to the tournament believing that you can make it there. So you should never go to a tournament thinking like, oh, I'm just going to try to see how well I can do and try to get better. You should always try to do your best. Excuse me. Still getting over a little bit of that cold there, so excuse me if I have to cough or clear my throat or anything like that. But anyway, yeah. So my belief is that you should cherish those moments. Like when you walk into even just a regular division, when you walk into a division at Warrior Cup, you should treat that as a special opportunity. The fact that these tournaments exist is a privilege. The fact that these tournaments exist means that a promoter or multiple promoters over the course of many years have worked very hard to build up the reputation and the prestige of that event. And that should be appreciated by every competitor that walks on the mat there. I don't care if it's a division, if it's a runoff, if it's an overall grand, if it's a Warrior Cup round, if it's an ISKA final, if it's a Diamond Ring final, whatever. Those promoters have worked really, really hard to get that tournament to the level that it is at. There is a lot of history behind those tournaments. Some of the greatest competitors in the history of our sport win these titles. So no matter what level of the tournament you're at on your quest to eventually win one of those titles, you should appreciate every single step of that. So don't treat it just like any other tournament. Take a moment to reflect. Take a moment before you compete to reflect and say, wow, this is a special opportunity. I'm going to make the most out of this. And for people that get nervous, it's all about visualization. Don't just treat it like another tournament. You should be spending the weeks before the tournament visualizing what it's going to be like. The moment that I'm done competing in a NASCA season, I know that I'm about to turn around in January and come compete in Chicago at the AKA Warrior Cup. So the next day, I start visualizing. What is it going to look like when I walk into the ring for a Warrior Cup? What is it going to look like when I walk on stage for a Warrior Cup? What's it going to sound like when Mike Chat announces my name and the number Warrior Cup that I'm going for? Who am I going to be looking at across the mat from me, trying to prevent me from winning a Warrior Cup while I'm trying to prevent them from winning a Warrior Cup so that I can win a Warrior Cup, right? I'm visualizing all of these things. And when you visualize those things beforehand, when you visualize those things when you train, then you are acclimated to that environment. You feel a little dose of that rush beforehand so that when you're there, you can just truly embrace it. One of the biggest regrets that I have about my competitive career is when I was having success when I was younger, right? I won my first US Open at the age of 12. I won another, wound up after my first US Open, I went on a 4 US Open win streak. So 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, I won 4 consecutive US Opens. I won my first Warrior Cup when I was 14, and then another when I was 15, I believe. So I won some major. I won a Diamond Ring when I was 14, 15, 16, and 17. But I'm more so talking about when I was 15 years old and below. One of my biggest regrets about that part of my career was the fact that I would often just go out there and do a form. Like I would just go out there and run a form and I would black out, right? I would just go out there and I'd be in the zone. I'd just do a form and I would do well and I would do great forms and I would win, but I wouldn't remember any of it. I wouldn't embrace the moment. And I think that that's one thing that because the timeline for most sport karate competitors is that you retire around the time that you go to college because you start focusing on other things. For me personally, that was something that I started thinking about going to college because I know that ultimately I'm going to go to medical school, right? Medical school. So my goal was to always compete throughout college. I'm going to be taking a gap year, which is a year in which you are applying to medical school. You're going and doing interviews, things like that. And then I'll be going off to medical school. And when I go off to medical school, getting tongue-tied here. When I go off to medical school is likely when I'm going to have to hang it up, because at that point I'm going to need to be 100% focused on becoming a physician and helping patients. But beside any of that, from the moment that I got to college at Stanford, that's where I realized once these 4 or 5 or 6 years are up and it's time for me to go on and start my training, my real training to become a doctor, I'm not going to be able to compete forever. Now, I'm always going to be at tournaments. I'm always going to be coaching. I'm always going to be teaching. I'm always going to be around because I love the sport too much to ever completely go away. But I won't be able to upkeep my standard of performance for competition. And so for so long, I thought about, like, when I was a kid, if I had focused on appreciating every moment, if I had really taken the time to just feel every emotion that you feel when you're up there, when you're trying to win a Warrior Cup, when you're trying to win a US Open, when you're trying to win a diamond ring, if I could have just appreciated that, I would have so many more vivid memories and I would appreciate those wins so much more. And so now every time I step on a stage, I close my eyes and take a deep breath, and I actually do a walk up the side of the stage. I think I'm the only person that does this. I literally walk up the entire length of the stage and then turn around and come back kind of to the center of the stage where I'm actually going to start my music. And in that walk, I'm just appreciative. I'm just appreciating the moment. I'm just feeling those emotions, feeling those unique modes. Like I said, there's hardly anything in the human experience that equates to the emotion of going for a coveted title that only the best of the best ever have a chance to win. And so my message for you going into Warrior Cup, if you're a competitor, go into Warrior Cup recognizing the importance of the event and be comfortable with the importance, the prestige, the history of the event, because it's not something that everybody gets to experience. Now, moving on to the second topic that I wanted to discuss about AKA Warrior Cup. I'm excited for two things. Number one, I'm most excited to get back out there. Haven't competed since December in Toronto. Haven't competed at a major, obviously, since the last major tournament, which was the Diamond Nationals. And I'm just excited to get back out there. Excuse me, one more time. Sorry for the coughing, guys. But anyway, if you guys haven't noticed, when you notice that I cough or anything like that, this podcast is completely unedited. I start the recording and then I just go, and just whatever thoughts come to mind, whatever conversation topics come up, I have a loose idea of what I want to talk about, but I just kind of talk to you guys. So a lot of you guys may not know that, but none of this is edited. This is just me off the dome, giving you my knowledge, giving you my opinions, giving you what I think. Anyway, so number one, I'm most excited to get back out there. I'm most excited to get back out there, compete, and have a great time because I love what I do. The second thing that I am most excited to see is some of the new faces on the new teams and overall just the parity in point fighting. Like, people talk about parity in the NBA, how like when the Warriors had Kevin Durant, the Warriors were too good, and Cleveland was the best team in the East because they had LeBron. Now LeBron's in the West. Now KD is injured and has gone to the Nets. So there's much more parity. There's much more equity and equality throughout the NBA. More teams have a chance to win it all. And I think that people see point fighting going into this season as that type of situation. There's a lot of parity, there's a lot of equality amongst point fighting teams going into this season. So I want to start by talking about the new faces. Alex Mancias, I believe, is going to be making his Team Paul Mitchell debut at the AKA Warrior Cup. I am very, very excited to see Alex Mancias. You know, he was somebody that was picked up as somebody that Team Paul Mitchell is going to develop and help grow as a fighter and become a great fighter. And I'm really excited to see Alex's development with Team Paul Mitchell start at the AKA Warrior Cup. There was another big acquisition this offseason. Top 10 USA picked up Tyreek Saint and Troy Benz. Troy Benz, I believe, won a heavyweight overall grand this year at the Ocean State Grand Nationals. Was that last year or 2 years ago? I believe that it was this past year. But anyway, so yeah, Troy Benz is legit. He's been legit for a long time. Tyreek Saint is a very, very talented young fighter, just recently made it into the adult division. Him and Bailey Murphy are going to be really, really good for a really long time. So congratulations to Top 10 USA for picking up those fighters, Tyreek Saint and Troy Benz. That's going to be exciting to watch Top 10 USA in team fights. And then these aren't so much new faces, but just to bring up teams that deserve that respect. Team Dojo Elite is going to be very strong. I'm assuming that by Chicago, Cameron Dawson is going to be recovered from the injury that had him sidelined at Diamond Nationals. I'm hoping, I got my fingers crossed, I hope he tries to go back to back with the Warrior Cups. And I hope that the people get what we want to see in that heavyweight Warrior Cup final. Because I don't know of any Paul Mitchell heavyweights that are going, or obviously I'd be rooting for them. But two of my favorite fighters outside of my Paul Mitchell teammates are Cameron Dawson and Avery Plowden. And to see them in a Warrior Cup final would be a dream come true. I think that's what every spectator wants to see, and I hope that that is what happens this weekend. Granted, there's other heavyweights that I like too. There's a lot of fighters that I like. It'd be cool to see Anthony Merrick's get up there, so on and so forth. There's a lot of fighters that I love, so I hate picking names and being like, oh, I want to see this person win or that person win. Most of the time, I just want to see a good fight. You know what I mean? But I think that a lot of the fans want to see Cam and Avery in that final. That would be awesome. Talking about Avery, Impex with their dynamic duo, the siblings, Avery Plowden and Morgan Plowden, might be one of the few times in sport karate history that there have been siblings that stand a reasonable chance of winning any overall for that matter. But in this case, Avery winning the Men's Fighting Warrior Cup and Morgan winning the Women's Fighting Warrior Cup. I remember Morgan did have the matchup that everybody wanted to see last year when it was Morgan and Keitana Everett in the Warrior Cup final. I believe Morgan won that fight. I'm pretty sure Morgan won that fight. And then Warrior Cup final last year was Cam. Cam wound up winning the cup. I believe Avery had a little bit of a rough start at Warrior Cup. But then Avery heated up throughout the end of the season. Avery won the Diamond Ring. He also won the WKC World, stuff like that. So Cam and Avery kind of traded off last year, with Cam kind of having the first part of the year and Avery kind of having the last part of the year. So it'll be interesting to see them go at it, as well as those two teams, Team Dojo Elite and Team Impex. And one more. And again, I am biased. I am a Paul Mitchell member. I bleed black and white. Disclaimer, I will always support Paul Mitchell. I will always think that Paul Mitchell is the best team, and I will always believe that Paul Mitchell will always be the best team, because I am on Paul Mitchell, and I've always wanted to be on Paul Mitchell, and I bleed black and white. However, I will say this. Do not sleep on John Paul Mitchell this year. Team Paul Mitchell will have a great team fighting team once again coming out to the Paul Mitchell tournaments this year. Now, aka Warrior Cup does not happen to be one of those tournaments, but I have some intel. And I was in the team meeting at the Diamond Nationals. And by the way, for those of you that don't know, Paul Mitchell team meetings they're like the stuff of legend, right? Like, people always talk about what goes on in a Paul Mitchell team meeting. Here is a glimpse into what happened at the Diamond's Paul Mitchell team meeting, without giving too much away. Laszlo and Tomas, two of our Hungarian fighters, they themselves were not pleased with how Diamonds went. Not from they didn't like the judging or anything like that, but just they thought that they could have fought better. And Laszlo fought great all weekend. Laszlo made it into the finals for the Diamond Ring. So Laszlo fought great all weekend, lost to a great fighter. I believe he lost to Avery Plowden in the final. So Laszlo had a great weekend. Tomasa didn't have as good of a weekend. I think he maybe lost to Avery in the eliminations. Again, losing to a great fighter. There's no shame in that. But in that team meeting, Laszlo and Tomas expressed a motivation that I have not seen in them before. Laszlo and Tomas are motivated to come back to America this year and make a statement when they compete. And I'm excited to see it. I love Laszlo. I love Tomas. They're my teammates. I am excited to see what they come out with this year. I'm excited to see that motivation come to fruition when they step out on the mat. And I can't wait to support them and be there ringside for them, cheering them on. And of course, our other fighters as well. We still have Michael Jefferson on our roster, who fought a great fight against Cam last year at the Battle of Atlanta. Obviously, we've just added Alex Mancias. We have the great Justin Ortiz, who's one of the best lightweights in the world. Justin Hotfoot Ortiz dealt with a little bit of a hand injury at Diamonds, but I think he'll be coming back from that. Not sure if he'll be coming back at Warrior Cup specifically, but he'll be coming back, of course, this year. So don't sleep on Team Paul Mitchell this year. I know other teams have had a lot of moving around, things like that, but you should never, ever sleep on the Team Paul Mitchell, with all of my bias accounted for. Now, before we move on into story time, and I know this episode's running a little bit long, but I kind of expected that, knowing that we were going to have the two discussion topics of Conor McGregor as well as the upcoming AKA Warrior Cup. And so we're going to interrupt this real quick before story time with an advertisement for the Flow Weapons Training System. The Flow system is an innovative weapons curriculum powered by the Martial Arts Industry Association, which is the consulting department of Century Martial Arts, the world's largest martial arts company. The Flow system offers a complete bow staff and comma curriculum. The bow staff taught by the founder and yours truly, Jackson Rudolph, as well as the expansion comma curriculum taught by the great Miss Mackenzie Emery. And the unique thing about the Flow system, there's many unique things about the Flow system, but one of my favorites is the instructor training. One of the most common reasons that weapons are not taught in martial arts schools is because of the fact that sometimes instructors don't feel confident enough teaching weapons. The Flow system for bow staff and commas has specific instructor training modules that teach instructors, black belt, staff members, school owners exactly how to teach the techniques that are being taught in the curriculum. So not only do you get to learn the techniques, the combos, the forms, but you're also learning the best strategies to teaching those techniques as well. Check out theflowsystem.tv for more information. Excuse me once again for the cough. And now we are rolling right into story time. And for story time today, we are going to be talking about, as I referenced earlier when I was talking about falling in love, or not falling in love with Conor McGregor, but becoming a fan of Conor McGregor during the Mendez fight. I want to tell a story about competing at the Vegas Open in 2015. And there's several folds to the story that I like a whole lot. So it's well known amongst fighters that fighters in the past, in the present, and most likely in the future have often moved up and competed in the adult division before they were actually old enough to compete in the adult division. There's several fighters that have done this. I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus or anything like that, but there's several fighters that have done this, right? So it's one of those unspoken rules of sport karate that it's kind of okay when the fighters do it, right? But forms people have never been allowed to do that. And when I was 16 years old, which would have been 2014, turned 17 in 2015, which is when the Vegas Open was. But when I was in 16, 17, I wanted very badly to go ahead and move up into the adult division. There was actually some talk about it. I remember, I think my dad brought it up to NASCA, just inquiring about if it was a possibility. And then one of the problems with people under the age of 18 competing in the adult division as well, if you win prize money, then it's not technically legal to pay out prize money to somebody under the age of 18. So it'd have to be a savings bond, something like that. At one point, I think that I even offered to be like, look, if I win, just don't pay me. If I win, just keep the prize money, and I just want to compete against the adults. I just want that challenge. But ultimately, it didn't work out. It's not a big deal. That's the rules. I'm cool with it, right? But Vegas Open in 2015 was not a NASCA tournament. So here's what happens. Vegas Open 2015, I believe, was an ISKA run event, and it was, I believe it was kind of a test run was the way they were doing it. It was like in coordination with this UFC event, so most of the people there were hardcore MMA people that don't do performance martial arts, and so there were maybe 50 competitors there doing performance martial arts. But Paul Mitchell brought their squad, and there were other competitors that weren't on Paul Mitchell there as well. So, for example, in my division, like it was me and Riker Weaver in the juniors, and then in the adult division was stacked. Reed Presley, Jacob Pinto, Kyle Montagna, who else? There were others there as well, right? But those were some of the highlights. Tyler Weaver was in the adult division at that time. So it was a big adult division. And I wound up winning all of the junior divisions. I won all of my junior divisions, won the junior grands and all that. And then because this wasn't a NASCA tournament, there weren't any really set in stone rules. So after winning all of the junior weapons divisions, one of the organizers of the event comes up to me and they're like, hey, would you like to compete in the adult grand? The prize money is just $200. You know, we'll see what happens, right? If you would like to compete in the adult grand, you can compete in the adult grand. We think it'll be good for the fans. It'll be a good show for everybody. And I was like, absolutely. I've been waiting for 2 years to get a chance to compete in the adult division. So if you're going to let me compete in this adult final with these NASCA guys, with these fellow Paul Mitchell members of mine, absolutely, I'm there. I'm going to compete in the adult division. And so I go on and compete in the adult division, and it was a mixed bag. There were extreme forms, extreme weapons forms. It was just everybody that had won adult divisions plus me in the grands. And I wind up running probably one of my favorite forums I've ever ran. I put in a couple of new upgrades in there that some of those competitors hadn't seen before, that type of thing. And I wind up winning that division. So that was my first time ever competing against adults, was in the Vegas Open in 2015. I got lucky in the sense that the tournament organizer allowed me to compete in the adult grand, which was crazy. They just kind of came up to me. They were like, hey, do you want to do this? I was like, sure, why not? And then I was fortunate enough and I was blessed to be able to go out there and win the division. But then in the aftermath of that, after I won the division, Sport Martial Arts actually posted the video of that forum on their Facebook. Now on the YouTube, it did not get nearly as viral, but on Facebook, it got it currently has 5.4 million views, which I believe is the most viewed sport karate forum to exist on the internet. If somebody can find one that has more than 5.4 million views and it's a sport karate form, not just a sport karate video, but a sport karate form, somebody's complete form doing sport karate, let me know. But I'm pretty sure that holds the record for the most viewed sport karate form on the internet, which I'm very blessed by. And to the fact that 5.4 million people have seen that form is crazy to me. And one of the biggest things that I learned from that video going viral is I noticed how many negative comments there were. Now, granted, there were a lot of complimentary comments, there were a lot of positive comments, but there were also a whole lot of negative comments. And a couple of things just about the negative comments. Number one, it taught me to have thick skin, right? One thing that a lot of kids focus on nowadays on social media is what people's impressions are, right? And you are inevitably going to have people that say nasty things on social media. People are going to make fun of you. People are going to insult you because they can hide behind their screen. Some people even make up fake pages purely to insult other people, which is despicable and gross, and nobody should ever do that, but that's what people do, right? So the number one thing that you have to remember is nothing that anybody says on social media that is a negative thing matters. People can make fun of you. People can say negative things to you on social media. None of it matters because they don't have the courage to say it to your face. If you're going to insult somebody, if you truly believe that that person deserves to be insulted, which I don't believe anybody ever deserves to be insulted, but if somebody is nasty enough to truly believe that person should be insulted, you should have the courage to say it to their face, right? Or, in my view, if you have something you don't like about somebody and you want to help them or make it better, then offer constructive criticism. You should never insult somebody. But anyway, so as somebody that is a consumer of social media, as somebody that uses social media, kids, if you're listening to me, do not let negative social media comments affect you because they are going to happen. People are going to make fun of you. They're going to insult you, and you have to just brush it off because they don't matter. What I always did with these comments was I always used them to motivate me, and I also use them for entertainment. So the first half of that is I listen to these comments and I hear people say, oh, well, he's not that good, or he's not this, or he's not that. And I just let that motivate me. I'm like, look, well, I'll just prove to all of you how good I am by winning X amount of Warrior Cups and winning X amount of US Opens and winning X amount of Diamond Rings, right? That's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go out there and win. And if you win, nobody can challenge the fact that I was good, right? Because I won X amount of times. The second half of that is humor. Sometimes I enjoy just going back and reading those comments because of the funny things that I find. For example, a couple of the comments say something to the effect of, that's not a real weapon, that's just a plastic stick. I'm going to say that one more time. That's not a real weapon, that is just a plastic stick. Number one, it is a real weapon. If I hit you with it, it would hurt. Therefore, weapon and real. If I hit you, it hurts. It is a real weapon. Second of all, I have never seen, held, or used a plastic bow staff. If I were to strike with a plastic bow staff, it would bend and break very, very quickly. Bow staffs are wooden. Even the bow staffs wrapped in tape are wooden bow staffs. The only thing that makes them sub-traditional is the fact that the bow staffs are wrapped in tape and are tapered. And the taper is purely so that people can go faster, right? And that was not an innovation that I made. That was an innovation that was around before I ever even started doing martial arts. So it's not my fault that people use tapered bows, you know what I mean? If people were using regular non-tapered bows, that's what I would be using too, because that's what everybody uses. That's the standard. So I find it hilarious that people go on there and say that the bow staff that I use is not a weapon and that it's plastic, because if I hit you, it would definitely hurt, and it's made of wood, not plastic. And the second one, and this one's a little bit disturbing actually, because people would actually think to say this, and it's actually a very common negative comment on bow staff videos, is well, if I could just shoot you with my gun, then none of that matters. And they say that as if like a traditional bow form could do better, like a hundreds of years old Japanese traditional bow form. Now I want you to picture this, right? I want you to picture somebody with a gun in your face, and you step back into a back stance and you attempt a traditional bow staff strike. You are going to get shot, no different than how I am going to get shot if I try to do a triple spin and catch the bow on my knee. Because I wouldn't do that if somebody had a gun in my face. I would use the self-defense techniques that I learned taking traditional martial arts classes, and I would try to talk my way out of the situation, because that's what you should do if you are faced with a gun. A creative bow staff form is not meant to defend against a gun, and I figured that that would be obvious, but clearly that is not. So anyway, but those are the comments that I find funny. Like, I talk about them, and the way that I'm trying to speak about them is in a humorous manner. I hope that when you're hearing this, my sense of humor is dry, but I hope that when you're hearing this, that you are laughing at the statements that are being made here. Calling bow staffs plastic, saying that you could just shoot somebody that uses a bow with a gun. Like, come on. Like, I read those comments and I just laugh at them. Like, that's funny to me. And so the biggest thing to remember is, even if you win the very first time you ever compete against adult competition, even if the video goes viral and has tons of praise and gets 5.4 million views, there are always going to be people that say negative things on social media, and it's okay. Ignore them. Keep training. If you keep winning, it doesn't matter how many negative comments get posted on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. I don't even know how to use TikTok or Vine. Vine's not an app anymore. Whatever. You get the point. Negative comments, they don't matter. Ignore them. And that is the conclusion of story time. And I know that this is definitely going to be the most long-winded podcast that we've had. But I do want to go ahead and close here by announcing 2 potential new segments that I am considering adding. And this is because tournament talk, I feel like, is inconsistent, because it's like there's not every week that a big tournament to talk about is happening or has happened. So I feel like tournament talk can sometimes be an inconsistent segment, as well as story time. I don't like to only talk about me. I like to talk about other things as well, because that's just how I am. I don't like to only talk about myself. And story time is largely about myself. So the 2 new segments that I'm considering, number 1 is doing Ask JRP. Now, one of the previous episodes, I believe it was episode 6, we did a full episode of question and answer to help you guys get to know me better. Actually, maybe it was episode 5. Anyway, we did a full question and answer episode to help my viewers and my listeners get to know me a bit better, things like that. And I think that was a good episode, because we get to talk a lot about my mindset when I compete, my strategy, who I am, how I look at competition, things like that. However, I think that we could do an Ask JRP with people asking for advice. That can be advice about competition, advice about getting into college, what I did to get into Stanford, advice about school, life balance, trying to balance a sport karate training schedule with school, things like that, especially as people are moving into college, that type of situation. So potentially doing a weekly hashtag Ask JRP, Jackson Rudolph Podcast, cast Ask JRP feature, where once a week there would be one question that I answer, so that could be submitted on any of my social media platforms with the hashtag Ask JRP, ASKJRP. And I would, do one of those questions per week just as part of the discussion. The other one that I'm considering is because many of you that know me well know that I am a complete and total nerd that goes to Stanford, and I love being able to share knowledge with people, and I feel like this would also open the doors to be able to talk about other topics outside of the martial arts, which is ultimately what I want to do. Ultimately, I want to be able to talk about anything on this podcast, have guests, and just be able to talk to anyone about anything. And as long as it's interesting, as long as that's what you guys as the listeners want to hear. So I want to start a segment where maybe we do like a fun fact, right? And from whatever subject, right? And people can submit this, right? Like people are like, I want to learn more about quantum physics, or I want to learn more about particle chemistry, or I want to learn more about anatomy, or I want to learn more about neurology, right? Whatever the case may be, right? These are all things that I've studied to some extent at Stanford. Obviously my area, or not area of expertise, because I'm not graduated, I'm not an expert, I won't be an expert for a long time, but my area of study is in human biology with a concentration on the brain and disease, neurology, oncology, things like that. And so I would love to be able to get into some of those topics. I also love poetry. I love the arts, things like that. So I'm also considering doing a segment called something like Fun Facts with Jackson or something like that, where once a week I just introduce one little tidbit of information for 5 minutes just to teach you guys something new. If that's something you're interested in, let me know. The reason that I didn't just go ahead and throw these segments in there is because I wanted to get feedback from my listeners first. So if you think that Ask JRP would be a good new segment every week, go ahead and submit those with the hashtag AskJRP. And if you think that Fun Fact would be a good new segment, go ahead, shoot me a DM, post on my page, comment on this episode, things like that. Let me know that's a segment you want to see. Or if you have other ideas for segments, let me know what those other ideas are so that I can try to accommodate those. Another note, I did say towards the end of 2019 that in 2020 we would be doing interviews. I said that it would be in January, but because I got sick and because Warrior Cup is coming up this week, sometimes things don't always work out that way. So there will be interviews. They probably will not be starting in January. They're probably going to be delayed to February, but we are going to get some other great martial artists on the podcast. I already know a couple of guys or gals. I'm going to keep it a surprise there. That have said they'd be interested in joining the podcast and talking about their career and their strategies and things like that. So I'm looking forward to getting into that. I hope you guys are looking forward to it as well. Once again, thank you guys all very much for your support. I love the fact that you guys tune in and listen to me every week. I've noticed I'm starting to get some regulars in the comment section. And honestly, that's my favorite thing. My favorite thing is when I see people sharing the podcast and when I see people commenting on the podcast so I can know what you guys think. I can hear your discussions. I want you guys to discuss these topics amongst yourselves. I'll jump into the comments too if the discussions are going good. So please, 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 comment, share. If you like the podcast, show me that you like the podcast. That's greatly appreciated. Thank you all so much for your support. I hope you enjoyed episode 8, the Notorious, referring to Conor McGregor, aka Warrior Cup. And for those of you attending the aka Warrior Cup, I'll see you this weekend. This has been another episode of the Jackson Rudolph podcast, and I'll see you next time.